Well, I'd like to welcome everybody to this second of Peace Brigades International's webinar series, Portraits of Resilience, Hope and Solidarity, which we're doing together with the Alliance for Lawyers at Risk. My name is John Dew, and I'm proud to be a patron of PBI UK, an organisation which provides practical support and physical accompaniment for human rights defenders at risk in Latin America, Africa, Nepal, Indonesia. I first came across PBI when I was ambassador in Colombia, where I first saw courageous human rights defenders working at great risk and the field volunteers alongside them from PBI at first hand. I've learned how important the contribution of the international community is in monitoring, building capacity, and strengthening the support network of human rights defenders. Just a few housekeeping points for everybody. You can put questions to the panelists using the Q&A feature at the bottom of the screen. Those questions will be answered either towards the end of the webinar after the panelists have spoken, or if we run out of time, on Twitter later. So your questions will be answered. Interpretation is available in English and Spanish. Interpretación tenemos en inglés y en castellano. And there's a globe or globo at the bottom of the screen saying interpretation. So if you need it, please use it. If you look at the chat feature, you'll see links to future webinars and the possibility of donations. We're expecting over 150 people to be in one way or another taking part, listening in to this webinar. So we're well attended from across the world. And if there's background noise, it's often because people have got their microphones on when they're not speaking. So if you're not speaking, please mute your microphone. Well, it's great to be here. This is, I think, a big occasion for PBI, a big occasion for all of us. The series is called Portraits of Resilience, Hope and Solidarity, with the focus today on Latin America, with the current COVID-19 crisis very much in mind. These webinars are a great opportunity to hear the stories and share the experience of human rights defenders directly. Human rights defenders are an essential resource for their communities, key workers rooted in their neighborhoods, able in particular to reach those outside the normal system. And this is where human rights defenders have such a role to play, not all the time, but especially in the time of the coronavirus. They need the widest possible international support. Governments have a role to play. I'm glad the UK government plays a significant role supporting HRDs and working with NGOs. A good example is the best practice guide for diplomats for supporting defenders, produced by the FCO and supported by PBI UK. It shows a genuine commitment to the protection of human rights defenders. But support needs to come at all levels, and that's why organisations like PBI and Alliance for Lawyers at Risk are so crucial. And through this webinar today, we are helping to develop and sustain that wider support. So thank you all for taking part. Latin America is a region particularly vulnerable to a crisis like this. Millions are obliged to earn a living, uncertain and precarious form, from day to day in hunger and poverty. Those who stand up for basic rights can expect violence, murder, and all forms of persecution. Responses to COVID-19 in Latin America have put human rights defenders at even greater risk. Life has got more dangerous for those already at risk. We've got 4 exceptional speakers today. We're very lucky to have all of them. International journalist Dina Meza will discuss the political implications of COVID-19 on Honduras, as well as the situation as it stands for journalists in that country. Dina is an award-winning journalist and a founder of the Asociación por la Democracia y los Derechos Humanos, ASOPODEHU. in Honduras. We also have esteemed lawyer and member of Colombia's Alvear Estrepo Lawyers Collective, CAJAR, Alirio Uribe, who will tell us about the rise and assassination of human rights defenders and collapse of the criminal justice system in Colombia. And we have Yadira Sandoval, who will talk to us about the effect of the outbreak on campesino communities in Nicaragua and on exiles living in Costa Rica. Yadira has been an active member of the Movimiento Campesino Nicaragüense since 2013. She's currently in Costa Rica, organizing for the Nicaraguan community in exile. So we have a fine lineup of speakers, and I'd like to invite Dina to lead off the discussion. Dina. Your microphone is muted.
Gracias por la oportunidad que nos están brindando para poder decir al mundo las cosas que están pasando en nuestros países. Honduras es un país que a lo largo del tiempo ha venido con una crisis de derechos humanos. Desde el golpe de Estado se ha profundizado esta crisis, pero con la llegada del COVID y una reelección ilegal en el gobierno, el actual presidente de la República tiene ya 2 periodos consecutivos de estar en la silla presidencial y en este último periodo, a partir del 2017, en una reelección ilegal y fraude en las elecciones. Pero el COVID vino a acrecentar este panorama. Si bien es cierto, teníamos graves violaciones a los derechos humanos, el gobierno, a través de Juan Orlando Hernández, que está siendo señalado incluso por lo que son el involucramiento en el crimen organizado, en el narcotráfico, en las cortes de los Estados Unidos, y a estas alturas no tenemos iniciada una investigación en el país. Entonces el COVID vino a ser la tabla de salvación para Juan Orlando Hernández en un momento en que estaba seriamente cuestionado por involucramiento en el narcotráfico. Llega el COVID a partir de marzo y desde ahí empieza ya a aprobarse muchísimos fondos. Tenemos miles de millones de fondos, más de 100.000 millones que se han aprobado para la pandemia, pero que no se concreta en la práctica. Hay desabastecimiento, hay muertes, hay incremento de casos, pero también está la profundización de la pobreza. Igualmente, la preponderancia de los militares. Se ha incrementado el militarismo, hay serias represiones contra la población. A la par de eso, hay suspensión de garantías constitucionales, el derecho a la circulación, el derecho a la propiedad, al domicilio. O sea que pueden entrar en estos momentos a mi casa y poder hacer algo contra mi persona y mi familia y otros defensores y defensoras de derechos humanos, a quienes nos niegan el derecho a defender los derechos humanos. Aquí están dando salvoconductos para salir a las calles, pero uno de los sectores que no incluyeron y creemos que es una política de Estado fue a los defensores de derechos humanos. Entonces podemos encontrar en este país que como la profundización de esta crisis tiene que ver no con el virus, sino con el virus de la corrupción, de las violaciones a los derechos humanos y la ilegalidad. Entonces, hasta ahí me quedo en este momento.
Muchas gracias. Es una situación bastante grave. Muchas gracias para describir eso tan
Well, thank you very much for the opportunity
Voy a invitar a Alirio
to be
decir
able
cómo es la
to
situación en Colombia.
speak a little bit about what's happening in our country. Honduras is a country that over the period of time has suffered a crisis of human rights since the coup that has got worse since the coup. But in the context of COVID-19,
Muy brevemente,
the President of the Republic he has now been a president 2 consecutive periods.
La pandemia del COVID,
and since 2017 he was re-elected illegally, so he's continued his rule. But COVID has made this problem even worse. We're suffering serious human rights violations,
en que los recursos públicos se vuelven cajas menores de los presidentes, los ministros, los alcaldes, los gobernadores.
And it is quite clear that there has been an increase of the role of organized crime in drugs trafficking towards the United States. And there has been no investigation, has even been initiated into these activities and complicity between the state and organized crime in drugs trafficking.
A las UCIs, a los respiradores, no ha hecho nada para garantizar que la población que está en cuarentena tenga un ingreso mínimo vital o una renta básica. Han salido más de 150 decretos que hacen una cantidad de ayudas que no llegan realmente a todos los pobres. En Colombia,
large amounts of money have been made available to the Honduran government in order to combat the pandemic, but no effect, no positive results have been achieved. People are dying and the levels of infection are very high. It has also seen an increase in levels of militarization and the use of oppression. And also the constitutional norms, the right to freedom of movement, the right to property, murder, all of these have increased. Abuses of these rights or violations of these rights have increased in the context of coronavirus. And also we are being denied the right to defend human rights, all under the pretext of the actions taken against coronavirus. As a state policy. So we could say in this country that what we have that the principal problem that we're facing is not so much with the virus, you could say, but with the virus of the abuse and violation of human rights.
Supuestamente hay aislamiento social, departamentos como el Cauca que tienen más de 10,000 militares y policías han seguido asesinando
situation. Thank you very much, Dina, for describing the situation so clearly. I'm now going to ask Alirio to describe the situation briefly in Colombia. Thank you very much. Thank you very much to the panel and to PBI UK for making this possible, and also for James, who is doing the interpretation, and also to recognize the important work that Dina and Yadira are carrying out in their countries. Very briefly, in Colombia, as in Honduras, we have a very serious historical human rights situation, and then on top of that, the COVID pandemic has arrived, and this government, like many governments around the country, has decreed states of alert, states of exception in response to coronavirus. And what this has done is concentrate power in the hands of the government, removing democratic controls, and this has led to increased levels of corruption in the authorities. And the government has not taken measures, even though we have demanded of the Constitutional Court, for instance, that we should guarantee the rights of the health service workers, the rights of the population to respirators and to health care. These demands that we have made have not been respected. There have been our demands that the vulnerable population should be helped economically, given the very serious effects of lockdown have fallen on deaf ears. And so this means that the vulnerable population does not have access to food. And this means that the measures that have been taken are not capable of providing a dignified life to the population, and the result of this has been that people are not following lockdown. They are going out on the streets, and therefore they're not being able to distance themselves, and that means that the poor population is the most vulnerable to coronavirus. And on the other hand, the armed groups, the illegal armed groups, the dissident guerrilla groups, the paramilitary organizations have been continuing to operate. In June, every single day in June, a human rights defender, a man or a woman, has been murdered. Every day in June. So social leaders have been murdered in their houses, there are even cases where social leaders have been murdered with their children, with their family members, with grandchildren, indeed, have been murdered at the same time. So the massacre, the murder of human rights defenders has continued, despite the fact that there are, for instance, as in...
En Nicaragua consideramos que es el único país en Latinoamérica que en el contexto del COVID el régimen se ha negado a declarar una cuarentena y mucho menos un estado de emergencia. Eso nos conlleva a que nos encontramos con un sistema de salud colapsado, ¿verdad? Las farmacias privadas con medicamentos agotados. El régimen no permitió que las clínicas ni los hospitales privados pudieran acceder a las pruebas del COVID. Además, ha hecho llamados a aglomeraciones, a marchas, pagando buses desde marzo para que la gente vaya a los balnearios.
I'm very sorry, my connection went, so the question, I didn't catch the...
A través del Observatorio Ciudadano COVID-19, que es un equipo multidisciplinario que le da seguimiento a la epidemia, al 3 de junio está reportando 5.027 casos de personas
positivas. Porque
y un total de 1.114
se fue la conexión, ya estoy.
Se ha hecho como el día con día los muertos express por los
he regresado
nocturnos e inmediatos. ¿verdad?
So I think that we had a problem with the connection. So I think it would be interesting if you could just repeat what you were saying at the end, Alirio, maybe the last 2 or 3 minutes of what you were saying. Thank you, John, and sorry, James, I'm sorry that I'm speaking so quickly for the interpretation. I was saying at the end that in Colombia, in the context of the lockdown, of the quarantine, militarization of the territory, of the regions has increased. There's been an intensification of the armed conflict with paramilitary groups, criminal groups, and with the dissident guerrilla groups have intensified their activities. And in the context of the pandemic, the level of murders of social leaders has increased. In June, on every single day in June, a human rights defender has been murdered. Some of these human rights defenders have been murdered in their houses during lockdown, and their children and their family members have been killed as well in these attacks. So the level of pressure, the existence of the dirty war in Colombia has not ceded at all, has not reduced. The Colombian government has brought United States troops also to Colombia during the lockdown under the pretext or with the explanation that they're going to be taking part in the war against drugs. Many thank you. So that's a very dark panorama that you're presenting there, Alirio. So now we're going to listen to Yadira Sandoval. Yadira, many thanks. Many thanks to everybody. So I'd like to, on behalf of the Nicaraguan Peasant Organization Movement, a greeting. Nicaragua is the only country in Latin America that, in the context of Latin America, the authorities have refused to announce a lockdown or a quarantine, as it's called. They've denied the existence of the pandemic. The private pharmacies have run out of medicines. There is no systematic response. The regime did not allow clinics or hospitals to have access to COVID testing. And they have also called for mass demonstrations, including providing transport so that the population can go out onto the streets in order to give the impression that everything in Nicaragua is normal, that there is no problem. Multidisciplinary group that has been examining coronavirus suggests that for the 3rd of June, we've got 5,000 and 20,000 cases and 1,400 and over 1,000 deaths. The government has established what are called express burials, carried out at night, immediately after the person has died, in order to try to cover up the fact that people are dying. If it's true to an extent that a certain section of the population, percentage of the population, has self-declared itself in isolation, in lockdown, but this has had the effect effect of making life, cost of living much more expensive. The majority of the peasantry, of the peasant population, is not able to get its produce to market because of the interruption and the levels of persecution that it's been suffering, that the rural population and the urban population is suffering, has not reduced. Selective murders continue. Political opposition continues to be attacked. An example of this was on the 20th of April on the island of Ometepe, where at least 3 people were murdered by AK-47s. And in the island of Ometepe, in a single community, the entire community was occupied by anti-riot squad. So according to the epidemiologists, if the pandemic has not been announced, and if measures are not taken, then it's possible, according to the epidemiologists, that some 90% of the population may be affected. The peasant, since the civil uprising of 2018, the rural and urban uprising against the Sandinista government, many of us were forced into exile in Costa Rica as a result of the activities and the demonstrations of 2018. There are thousands of asylum seekers in Costa Rica. So many of us are based in Costa Rica now, but carrying out our work of monitoring the situation in Honduras. Some people have stayed in Costa Rica. Some people have stayed working in Nicaragua, but others of us are working in Costa Rica. In terms of those of us who are living in Costa Rica, those of us who have sought asylum in Costa Rica, what are the implications? Well, the closure of the borders have been closed. And this has meant that it is now not possible for people to cross the borders because the borders have been closed in order to stop the spread. And so the consequences of this have been very serious. We're finding that we in Costa Rica have had to implement measures in order to protect ourselves from the pandemic, and that means that people have lost work. We therefore have no income, and so the effect of those of us who are human rights defenders in exile in Costa Rica means that we don't have any guaranteed income, we don't have any guaranteed medical or health care, so the situation for us is particularly difficult. We're also facing difficulties with immigration status. Our visas have run out, and this means that the rights that we would have had as a result of our exile are also not being honoured. So people are doing what they can in order to make ends meet. We're carrying out our domestic work. We're not able to work in the labour market, and this has meant that we are facing very serious problems as well.
Entonces los periodistas son el vehículo de
Up
información
until
que
March,
traslada a la sociedad las cosas
we
que están
found that
pasando.
the figures were that for March, over 700 people, 727 people had given up their asylum claims because of the difficulty of the situation they were experiencing.
A los periodistas les quitaron
And of course, the most affected, the most marginal in the Costa Rican society at the moment are those of us who have sought asylum, because we have absolutely no rights in a situation of great uncertainty. Bueno, thank you very much, Yadira.
Entonces es una situación bien delicada,
Thank you
falta de
for
acceso a
that
información,
description,
represión policial y además
such a dark description
estigmatización del
as well,
trabajo.
but
Hay periodistas
difficult
que
but
tienen
very,
vedado
very
entrevistar
interesting.
a funcionarios.
We've got half an hour left.
No les permiten
We've got
hacer entrevistas
81
porque sencillamente los
participants at the
funcionarios
moment,
se enojan
according to
como
what I can
abordan
see
un tema.
on the screen,
En el
but
caso
we
de la
also
suspensión de garantías
have
constitucionales,
not very many
es que
questions have been
tenemos,
received.
suspendido el
So
derecho a
I'm going
circulación.
to
Solamente
motivate
podemos salir
people,
por
I'm going to
número de
ask
identidad
people,
cada
encourage
15 días.
people
Y hay grupos que no
to
podemos
pose their
salir. Por
questions
ejemplo,
on the
defensores de
text.
derechos humanos
But there
y
are
las
some questions
defensoras
for Dina.
que no nos incluyeron
What
en
has
los
been the
salvoconductos que dan a
impact
grupos. O sea,
of
no somos una
COVID-19
prioridad para el gobierno, para
for
el Estado
journalists, for the
y
journalists
entonces
who are
están limitando
covering
nuestro
the
derecho
situation? in Honduras, covering such a complicated situation. And what new restrictions have been imposed? And then another question for Dina, which is what is the status of the suspension of constitutional rights on freedom of expression? And then we've got a question really for everybody. What measures might be possible, could possibly be taken in order to protect human rights defenders in this situation? But perhaps it's best to get ask Dina to respond to those first two questions, and then we can ask the third question more openly to everybody. Right, well, many thanks. The situation of journalists over time has been complicated. It's difficult to be a journalist in our country. It's one of the most dangerous countries in the world to act as a journalist, And the pandemic has made things much worse. There is repression. The police and the army beat journalists when beat up journalists when they're covering the question. And there have been several journalists who have been imprisoned because they're covering the demonstrations that are being held in the streets. And so the government the authorities arrest us, or they keep us under house arrest. They're making it impossible for us to leave our houses to cover the work and to carry out to exercise our work as journalists. So journalists are as journalists are the ones who provide information for society, to society. They have an interest in stopping us providing this information. In the south and in the west of the country, there is a lot of oppression being exercised against journalists. We have been refused, we have been blocked from publishing our stories. And there's been very active, very rapid actions taken by the authorities to stop us carrying out our work. So it's a very, very difficult situation. Repression, but also refusal to allow us to publish our work. We're also being stigmatized for our work as journalists. We're not able to carry out, and we're prohibited from carrying out interviews because they don't want information to be provided. We also have found that the right to freedom of movement has also been restricted, severely restricted, and there are groups, including, for instance, human rights defenders, who are not able to exercise their right to freedom of movement. They're not being given the safe conducts, the papers that are required in order to be able to move around during the lockdown. And as in this country, the justice system doesn't operate properly. We're not able to use the legal system in order to assert our rights. We made a petition, a request, an amparo request in order to be able to carry out our activities, but we're not being able to advance these requests in the legal system. And as a result of that, we're not being able to operate. Repression in the streets is increasing and it's not being reported. People have been shot in the streets, and none of the people who are responsible for the people who have been killed in the streets have had to respond to the justice system. And so then a question for Yadira. If President Ortega might be taking advantage of the state of siege, the state of emergency, in order to benefit in next year's elections. Well, there have been rumors coming from the National Assembly that the elections are going to be postponed until 2022. We have been carrying out, we've been trying to analyze why they're not, why they haven't imposed a quarantine. And it could be that they are interested in allowing a health emergency chaos to emerge, and that would be a pretext for not calling the elections, and that would be the pretext for postponing the elections a further 2 years. But so far they haven't announced any plans. It's not a presidential decree, but there are rumors that this is what lies behind it, that they're interested in postponing the elections for a couple of years. Bueno, thank you. And I've got a series of questions for Alirio. Alirio, I don't know if you can see, we now have a series of questions for Alirio. I don't know if you can see them in the chat.
Y eso se tradujo en una masacre en la cárcel modelo de Bogotá, donde ejecutaron a tiros a 23 presos e hirieron a más de 80.
On the question of what's happening with the courts, especially with the high courts in superior courts in Colombia, I can say that we're trying to remain litigating. The Constitutional Court is still working to ensure the constitutionality of all of the decrees that have been emitted during the emergency. So they are trying to continue with their work to guarantee the Constitution.
En el Q&A, en la question and answer, pero si es posible. Pero voy a
so there've been requests from the citizens from the population to challenge. There have been challenges to the constitutionality of certain of the decrees, and the court has been sessioning in a virtual manner. So it's operating, the Constitutional Court is operating, I'd say, maybe at 30% of capacity. But in some aspects, important aspects, it is operating. What isn't operating is Congress. Congress is not fulfilling its duties to oversee constitutionality of the government's actions. The Congress has found it very difficult to operate virtually. It's very difficult for it to carry out its activities, to exercise control over government actions. So that's not working so well. And in terms of protection for human rights defenders, well, of course, we are continuing to seek to protect human rights defenders, but from civil society. But the government isn't really very interested in dialogue with us. But the spaces continue. We're continuing to work with tutela actions, with amparo actions in the face of the presented to the Constitutional Court. We're continuing to denounce eradications, illegal forced eradication of illegal cultivations, etc., because these are activities that are being carried out by the army and the police and the anti-riot squad. The riot squad, they're continuing to enforce forced eradication of crops which is bringing with it abuses, human rights abuses of the population. They're not meant to be carrying out forced eradication, and the effect is really that these constitute an attack on the rural population. So we're continuing to work on the violations that are committed under the pretext of eradication of illegal crops. And like we've heard in Nicaragua and Honduras, many people who have protested are being repressed. 17 prisons have protested about the conditions in the prisons. For instance, there was a prison riot, an uprising in the Picasso prison in Bogotá, where 23 prisoners have been murdered, killed in the course of one of the prison riots. So we have certain questions that are taking place in the Q&A, and then others algunos en el chat y otros utilizando and others using the Q&A. Es mucho mejor que utilice.
Por supuesto, creo que
it's much better to use the Q&A, please. But I'm making the effort to look both at the chat and the Q&A. I'm using both sources. So, otra pregunta para todos los tres panelistas. How has the situation changed during the pandemic? What is working and what is not working? If you could begin with that.
Pero también tenemos alianzas internacionales con organizaciones de libertad de expresión. Estamos haciendo
what's working with international accompaniment and what isn't? Well, for us, international accompaniment is fundamental.
expresarse, a los periodistas principalmente, al derecho a la
it's
protesta,
been very
las
important.
mujeres,
For instance, the
sus
accompaniment
derechos.
provided by
Y hay
PBI,
toda
we've been
una
able to
violación
organise
en el
virtual chats,
total de los
virtual
derechos humanos del nuevo
meetings,
Código Penal. Entonces estamos con Reporteros Sin Fronteras, artículo 19, PEN International,
which have been,
la
we've been
Fundación
able to,
para
have
la
been very
Libertad de
important
Prensa
to
de
sort of keep
Colombia
our
también.
optimism up,
Estamos ahí
keep us
trabajando
optimistic.
este tema.
And then
Y es
other
importantísimo
organisations
también
like
cómo
SOS,
a través
Global
de las
SOS for
misiones
Human
la
Rights in
Unión
Nicaragua
Europea
has
tiene
also been
entre sus
very
mandatos
important, and Oxfam Intermon,
ponga
Spanish
a
Oxfam,
andar
has
las
also been
directrices de la Unión
supporting
Europea para
us
defensores de derechos
in
humanos. Igualmente las
in
tiene
food,
Canadá,
the
las tiene
provision
el
of
Reino
food
Unido
for
también.
those of us who are living
Entonces me
in
parece que es
Oxfam, so that
importante
has
que en
been
este
very
contexto
important.
Todas las misiones
But that's
se pongan
really
en sintonía
about what we've been
porque
able
hay
to
una gravedad en las
achieve.
violaciones de derechos humanos. Tenemos un
In terms
acompañamiento
of
muy
international
bueno del
support,
Alto
yes, there have been
Comisionado de la
food
Oficina del Alto
parcels that have
Comisionado de
been
Derechos Humanos del
useful,
país
and also, as I
que
say, these
estamos
meetings here in
conversando
Costa Rica
constantemente sobre
to help us
casos
keep our
y están
spirits up.
apoyando
In
algunos
Nicaragua
casos. Igual
itself,
brigadas internacionales
our
de paz cuando
leaders,
tenemos problemas
individuals and
de
organizations,
casos
well,
así
our
de
leaders, the leaders of the
gente
organizations
encarcelada o
have been able to
perseguida.
provide
Entonces
a
tenemos ese
certain level of
apoyo y es muy
help
vital
to
para nuestro
people
trabajo.
who put themselves into contact with them. They've been able to organize medical support for people who really need it. People who the Sandinista regime, who the regime after 2018 excluded, denied the right to medical support. We have been able to help some of those people who suffered from the measures taken after 2018. That's as a result of direct contact that they have made with our community leaders who've been able to provide medical support. But in Nicaragua, on the whole, people who have had to stay in the house, isolate themselves at home. So there has been a certain ability to get medicines and food support for people who have been self-isolating. And also, we've also been able to keep in contact with some of these people by internet. Dina, if you wanted to add something perhaps?
Esto ya lo hacíamos, pero ahora lo hacemos con el énfasis de lo que está pasando con la pandemia. Esa afectación a la democracia es mundial. Los derechos humanos no pueden entrar en cuarentena. La democracia no puede entrar en cuarentena. En varios países se está intentando posponer procesos electorales precisamente aprovechándose de la pandemia. En varios países se están recortando derechos y libertades ciudadanas.
Alirio has said the hired killers, the killers are in the streets. We still have needs of physical protection. So PBI has played an important role there.
Para decretar estados de emergencia y propiciar
but we also have the support of international freedom of expression organizations that have been working with us on campaigns to maintain our freedom of expression or to try to protect our freedom of expression, that have protested. We've had groups of women who have supported us in we've received women's demonstrations in Honduras against the abuse of women, and the freedom of expression for women have been supported internationally. Freedom of the press, we're operating there as well. There's also, I know, a problem in Colombia. So this support has been important. Also the missions, like the European Union mission, the diplomatic community has been also played a very important role. They have also been making statements and monitoring the human rights situation. Canada, the United Kingdom, has been continuing to monitor the situation, and that has been very important for us as well. I believe that the accompaniment that we receive is very good. We've also got very good levels of accompaniment from the UN Human Rights Commission. We're talking with the Office of the UN Human Rights Commission. We've been talking permanently, maintaining a permanent contact with them, and we are talking about our cases, discussing our cases and sharing our cases with PBI, and all of these levels of support are fundamentally important for us to be able to continue our work. Thank you. Alirio, do you have anything else that you could add? Well, yeah, on international accompaniment, we have the accompaniment of the UN monitoring the peace process. We have the UN, the Office of the UN High Commissioner for Human Rights, who are working with us. We've also tried to maintain a profile for international advocacy. Thanks to PBI, who's been very, very important to us there. We've tried to maintain contact, or we have maintained contact with parliamentarians of the members of the European Parliament, with Spanish
la familia, en cómo
parliamentarians, with different international institutions, with the diplomatic community, in order to try to keep alive understanding of the situation of human rights defenders in the context of the pandemic. We're aware that this situation, that the concerns for human rights in the context of the pandemic is an international problem. It's not correct. It can't be acceptable that human rights are being compromised under the excuse of the pandemic. Governments around the world are taking advantage of the pandemic in order to limit human rights. Many governments are not so much using the declaration of states of emergency in order really to respond to the pandemic, but to continue restricting human rights. We've tried to work internationally to make these points clear, to make them apparent, but it's difficult to do this work when we're all enclosed and when we're in self-isolation. We're doing what we can to keep our voices alive and to spread the story. We're continuing to carry out educational activities to try to keep our issues live in public debate. We're doing all that we can to do this, but it's a challenge. We're seeking also to continue to raise the profile of unemployment, people who've lost their jobs, people who've lost income, the large number of people who have lost their jobs as a result of the pandemic. So our situation is very similar to that described by Yadira and Tina. I'm receiving a lot of questions still, but one that seems particularly interesting to me. Does it seem to you, or do you feel that women are particularly affected by this situation? In Latin America, Yadira, would you like to speak about the particular effect on women? Yes, of course. The situation of women, well, obviously it affects us a lot more. COVID, a lot of the people infected are mothers or the partners of people who have been infected, and it's not easy to respond to this situation when you're living lockdown in the situation that we've described, when the police are applying pressure and when our family members are infected. So yes, we feel that we as women are the keystone of our families, and so the vital part of our families. So it's a double pressure that we have. We have to look at how we can resolve problems that are being faced by my family, but also how I escape the pressure that is being imposed on us by the police. So we've got that, our own activism and our responsibilities with the family, but also as human rights defenders, what can we do to work with the rest of the population? That's how I see it. And so for me too, I'd also like to bring up the situation of the political prisoners. There are 36 political prisoners who have been affected with COVID-19, and of these only one of them has received medical treatment, and they're in a critical situation. The other 35 political prisoners are still in prison, and they don't have access. They're not even, their families aren't even able to take the medicines in the prison. They're just there alone in the prison with symptoms. Yes, of course, violence against women is very, very strong. It's terrible, and in the context of the pandemic it's got worse. We've got more than 19,000 complaints of domestic violence. In the house, women have to share their living space, their houses, with their abusers, so that's a terrible problem. We've also got situations of violence in the women's prisons. 6 women were murdered in prison last week, and we've also got very disturbing situations of the abuse of the human rights of women. according to the first indications of the research that we've carried out, are preliminary, but it does look that violence against women, abuses of women have increased under the situation of the pandemic. Human rights defenders, it looks like they are being attacked under the, or taking advantage of the circumstances of the lack of vigilance that is the lack of monitoring that is the result of the coronavirus pandemic. Thank you. Alirio, if you have anything that you would like to add?
Uno, dos o tres para responder. Si puede empezar otra vez con Yadira.
In Colombia.
Yadira.
Ok. Una de las preguntas dice, ¿cómo podemos apoyar desde los países europeos? Una que logré ver ahora.
In Colombia, the
Nosotros
women's
como
organizations,
movimiento campesino, como defensores de derechos humanos, hemos lanzado un SOS por ayuda internacional. En este momento, nosotros somos beneficiados por las Brigadas Internacionales de la Paz, como les decía, con talleres psicoemocionales y con una forma de cómo llevar el COVID a través de las redes virtuales. Sin embargo, nosotros sí quisiéramos ayudarle más a nuestra gente y no hemos podido. Nuestros dirigentes están en Nicaragua solicitando ayuda.
So the women, as Dina has said, are enclosed in their houses with the people with their abusers.
Funcionarios del régimen Ortega Murillo.
And therefore, and even when they are able to denounce, make complaints, the capacity to investigate their complaints has reduced. There is research has been carried out that for Latin America as a whole, but we think this is the case in Colombia as well, that there's been an increase of about 75% in the level of attacks against women. We have got information of how in the prisons, many women have been stripped, many women have been raped. In the context of the pandemic, there have been several cases also of police violence committed against women, cases from Cali, for instance. So it's quite clear that the pandemic has had a more powerful effect on women. Another question for our invitees. Are you able to see the questions in the Q&A?
Igual en el exilio, nosotros estamos tratando de llevar cómo hacemos para trabajar una campaña educativa porque el COVID en el exilio ha generado un 1000% de la xenofobia hacia los nicaragüenses. ¿Cómo hacemos nosotros con una campaña educativa? Realmente tenemos miles de ideas, pero lo que no tenemos son recursos.
Because there are some specific questions for each one of you in the Q&A.
Hay unas preguntas que
it would be there are some specific questions for each one of you. It would be interesting perhaps if one of you
tuvimos un pequeño problema de
one of those
electricidad. Espero que sea una
and maybe respond, and then after responding to one or two questions each, we could try and wrap up. So there might be one or two questions that would be particularly interesting.
Por ejemplo, lo necesitamos urgentemente. Definitivamente es muy importante la incidencia que puedan hacer la comunidad internacional para parar todas estas violaciones a derechos humanos, el hecho de que hay una corrupción tan descarada. La gente se ha quedado sin, bueno, normalmente tenemos un sistema de salud precario, pero con esta pandemia,
so this is how can we from European countries, what help could we provide? We as the peasant movement, as human rights defenders, we have launched an international SOS, and we at the moment are supported by PBI, with workshops, with virtual workshops which have been helping us. But we would like to be able to provide more support for our people, but we've not been able to. Our leaders who are still based in Nicaragua have been requesting help from Nicaragua, from the United States, but because of the sanctions, that there are problems in receiving money from the United States. But what we are only asking you in Europe is that you help us to help. We have a large population living both in exile and in Nicaragua that are suffering hunger, that don't have access to health care, and we're not able to help them. So we're asking for help to help us help them. We find that if for the peasant, the rural population, it's very difficult for the rural population to have access to the internet, but they do have access to the radio. So we've been thinking, well, what could we do as the peasant movement to establish community radio, so that at least through the radio we can make contact with the peasant population to be able to talk to them and provide support about the COVID situation. We're also looking at educational campaigns so that we can educate the host population, because there's been a very a brutal upsurge in the levels of attacks on the exile population in Costa Rica. So there's lots of things that it would be helpful to receive help with, that it would be good to receive help with. Well, we had some problems with electricity here, with the electricity supply. I hope it's just been a coincidence and not anything worse than that. Yeah, I mean, I've said that the international focus on Honduras is very important. Advocacy, the advocacy that the international community can carry out in order to document all of these human rights abuses that we have talked about, in order to document the shameless corruption that we're suffering from. At the best of times, the health service is precarious, but under the situation of the pandemic, it's got much, much worse. And this means the result has been that the population has no access at all to health care. And also, the Honduran state has been carrying out an international campaign, media campaign, saying that it is defending human rights. But I think it's very important that you don't only look at the official press. When you're looking at the media, when you're looking at press reports on Honduras, don't just look at the mainstream press. You've got to look at alternative press as well, so that you can find out what is really happening, so you're aware of what is really happening. In Honduras, the concentration of power is very marked, but also that is reflected in a concentration of media ownership. So it's important that the international community looks at the sources of information that it uses. We also need resources, because we need to look at the resource transfers, because at the moment the international community is continuing to finance the Honduran government, and the Honduran government continues to kill its people. Alirio.
En camión, en bus, usar todos estos transportes para poder llegar a un hospital, y a un hospital que está colapsado, un hospital que no hay medicina y que además no te diagnostica la enfermedad. Entonces, obviamente ellos son muchísimos más vulnerables. En el caso de nosotros igual, y todavía continúa el asedio en el sector campesino. Hasta la fecha son 63 los asesinados. Recientemente en la zona norte del país, un opositor al régimen, defensor de derechos humanos campesinos, ha sido asesinado.
We have seen in the United Kingdom, this is a question for everybody, we've seen that the COVID-19 has affected the BAME population.
Gracias. Ya estamos casi al final
have we seen
de la hora que
something
tenemos.
Similar in your country? So it's the black and the ethnic minority population that has been most affected? Yes. Yes, the vulnerable groups are those that are most affected in our country. the indigenous population, the black population on the Atlantic coast and the north are the most seriously affected, are very seriously affected. Medicines, the health services have never been available to those communities, and it's even less provision now. They're not allowed to return to their communities. They have to have a safe conduct pass in order to be able to go back to their communities. Several people have been, of Garifuna people in the north of the country have been murdered already by the army, and it was the army that has a presence in these communities, Garifuna communities in the north. There's a battalion that operates there that before the pandemic was committing serious human rights violations, and that is continuing to do the same during the pandemic. So yes, there is an attack. So we've got there is an attack on these populations. They have vulnerabilities, they've been victims of discrimination, and they're also being actively attacked now. The situation's basically the same as the situation that Dina has described. The most affected are those who have been most dispossessed, the peasant population and the indigenous population, because like Dina says, they didn't have access to health beforehand, and they have even less now. So a peasant person, a rural dweller who is infected, they've got 3 days travel to get to a health post, 3 or 4 days, and that means that they have to go on a horse, and then in a canoe, and then a bus in order to get to a health post. And then once they get there, the health system has collapsed. The clinics don't have medicines, they don't have the capacity to diagnose the disease. So obviously this population is much more vulnerable than the more favoured population. But also murders are continuing. We've had 63 community leaders have been murdered since the beginning of the coronavirus. So people have to struggle against poverty, against human rights violations, and against the coronavirus in circumstances in which they have no way to defend themselves. So we're nearly at the end of our hour. Alirio, do you have microphone?
Creo que es muy importante que la comunidad internacional, haciendo uso de los convenios internacionales, de las directrices para defensores, de los convenios de libertad de expresión, puedan hacer su parte para nuestro país. O sea, como les decía, no seguir dando apoyo económico a un gobierno violador de los derechos humanos porque le están dando el dinero para que violente al pueblo y para que mate. Por otro lado, tenemos presos políticos en nuestro país. 8 defensores del agua están presos en la zona norte del país, y a pesar de que no deben estar en prisión, el sistema de justicia los mantiene. No han funcionado ninguno de los recursos. Además, tenemos como defensores de derechos humanos y defensoras conculcado el derecho de defender los derechos humanos. El sistema de justicia no ha hecho ninguna acción.
We have to monitor, carry out an international monitoring of the Duque government on the policies that they are implementing in response to the pandemic, but also to monitor the increase in the grave violations of human rights, the serious human rights violations that have increased during the pandemic. Illegal armed groups are recruiting young children again. Paramilitary groups have strengthened. This FARC dissident and ELN dissident groups have increased in strength, so has the ELN. So we really need to have a lot of international solidarity on these matters. The possibility, it's perfectly possible now that we have US troops in Colombia. It's not impossible that there will be an attack launched against Venezuela from Colombia. There are 2 million Venezuelans in Colombia, and
hacer un llamado a la comunidad internacional
and we would be very concerned about the possibility that the refugee crisis would increase. We're not in conditions at the moment to be able to deal adequately with a further refugee influx. I'd want monitoring of the social impacts and the human rights impacts of the measures taken against coronavirus. We want to ensure monitoring so that it is clear that the measures taken against coronavirus are against the virus and not against democratic standards. Diego, do you have any final words? Yeah, Dina, yes, I think it's very important to contain the infection, obviously. Even though the government is an illegitimate government, it's a dictatorship that has sought to benefit from the coronavirus and to manipulate the media and the justice system. I think given that, it's very important that the international community
a wonderful hour.
Uses the agreements on freedom of expression and the guidelines on human rights defenders, that it doesn't continue to provide economic support to this government, illegitimate government, that is continuing to attack human rights defenders.
Thank you to all the speakers. Human rights defenders.
We also have a problem with political prisoners in the country. 8 defenders of water resources are in the north of the country, are in prison. Even though they're not meant to be imprisoned, the justice system is keeping them in prison. None of our efforts to use the legal system to get them released have been effective. The legal system is not operating as it should.
Our communications and comms expert, the whole of the Peace Brigade's international UK team, and our very hard-working and exceptional interpreter, James Lapton. The next webinar in this series is on 17 June, when fellow PBI UK patron Juliet Stevenson will read out stories from the field.
All of the political conversations
on the role of lawyers in protecting the environment, women's rights in the COVID context, and corporate accountability and our role in protecting future generations. These are on 24 June, 1 July, and 8 July. So once again, thank you to all the participants. Thank you to our speakers. And I think we have a lot to think about and a lot more to reflect on and a lot more support and encouragement to give in the future. Thank you very much. Bye.